Cascading electrical failures, the co-pilot yelled over the screaming alarms. Captain Miller, a veteran with 30,000 flight hours, gripped the controls of the plunging Boeing 767, but the aircraft wasn't responding. Through the chaos, a memory flashed in his mind. The 13-year-old black girl in a NASA t-shirt he'd seen at the gate, the one reading a university-level aerodynamics textbook. He'd dismissed her ambition to be a pilot with a condescending smile. What Miller didn't know was that the girl, Leanna Jackson, had spent every weekend since she was 6 in a flight simulator with her grandfather, a former Tuskegee airman. He didn't know her father was an MIT aerospace engineer who specialized in this exact aircraft's failure scenarios, and he certainly didn't know that in 30 seconds this girl would appear at his cockpit door, the only person on board who knew how to save them. As the plane shuddered, violently hurtling 17 souls toward the Atlantic, the captain was about to learn a brutal lesson. Protocol was failing, experience was useless, and his only hope for survival was to relinquish control to the very child he had underestimated. The pilots exchanged glances of disbelief as 217 souls hurtled toward the Atlantic at 600 million harms. How could this child possibly know what veteran aviators with 30,000 flight hours between them had missed, and why would they ever relinquish control to her? But sometimes survival demands the unthinkable. If you're finding this story compelling already, subscribe now to make sure you don't miss what happens next. This real-life drama contains lessons that might save your life one day. 47 minutes earlier, Jackson had boarded transatlantic flight 2257 in Charlotte with nothing more remarkable in her carry-on than a dog-eared physics textbook and her grandfather's pocket watch. Just another unaccompanied minor flying to visit her father in Boston, assigned to seat 14C, attracting no particular notice from flight attendants who'd seen thousands of children travel alone. Certainly nobody who glanced at the slender girl in worn jeans and a NASA t-shirt would have imagined that, before this flight touched ground again, the fate of everyone on board would rest in her young hands. Now, as the cockpit crew hesitates with destruction rushing toward them, Leanna does something extraordinary. She doesn't plead, she doesn't panic. Instead, she begins to speak in the specialized language of aviation that no 13-year-old should possess, naming systems and procedures with the fluency of someone born into the sky itself. You've got cascading electrical failures from the lightning strike. She continues moving closer despite the co-pilot's warning hand. The FMS is giving you false readings, but there's a manual override sequence. You can get her out of here. Captain Miller barks at the flight attendant, hovering anxiously behind her. Cockpit is restricted. The plane drops suddenly, stomach turning feet in an instant, sending the standing flight attendant sprawling against the wall. Oxygen masks deploy throughout the cabin, unleashing screams from passengers now fully aware of their peril. Batana remains upright, one hand gripping the door frame, dark eyes fixed on the primary flight display. 27 seconds, she says. That's how long you have before the backup generator overloads too. The co-pilot Henderson, younger than Miller by 15 years, swivels toward her. How could you possibly know that Leanna's gaze doesn't waver? Because I've seen this before. The words hang in the air between them. Impossible, and yet delivered with such conviction that doubt begins to fracture. Outside the reinforced windows, storm clouds boil against the wings, occasional lightning illuminating the downward trajectory that no amount of experience seems able to correct. In the main cabin, a businessman clutches his rosary beads, while beside him, a retired schoolteacher silently mouths prayers. A young couple twins their fingers together, wedding rings catching the flickering emergency lights. A flight attendant comforts a sobbing child, separated from his mother by the arbitrary assignments of airline seating. 214 stories, 214 lives, all converging toward an ending none of them chose. Unless the impossible proves true, unless wisdom can come from the most unexpected source, unless men trained to command can find the courage to listen, Captain Miller's next decision will challenge everything he believes about authority, expertise, and his own identity as the unquestioned master of his aircraft. It will force him to confront biases so deeply embedded he's never acknowledged their existence. Most of all, it will test whether, when faced with catastrophic failure, he can recognize salvation even when it comes in a form he never anticipated. To understand how they arrived at this moment of truth, we need to go back to the beginning, to an ordinary Tuesday morning that held no hint of the extraordinary events about to unfold. Liana woke before her alarm, as she always did on flight days. The habit was so ingrained, her grandmother Bessie joked that jet fuel must run in her blood. Outside her bedroom window, dawn was just beginning to soften the Charlotte skyline, the early July humidity already pressing against the glass. She checked her phone. 5:17 a.m. 43 minutes before her alarm would have sounded. Can't sleep through a flight day. Can you sugar? Bessie called from the kitchen, her voice carrying through the small apartment they shared in the East Charlotte. The scent of coffee and something sweet. Cinnamon rolls. Ilana Guess wafted down the hallway. Never have, Iana answered, padding barefoot across worn hardwood floors toward her grandmother's voice. She found Bessie exactly as expected, standing at the stove in her faded blue robe, gray hair wrapped in a silk scarf, humming softly to herself as she rotated perfect golden rolls onto a cooling rack. Your daddy called while you were sleeping, Bessie said, not turning around. Said there's some kind of weather system moving in, but your flight should beat it. He's real excited to see you. Ileana nodded, the complicated feelings she always experienced before visiting her father rising to the surface. Love, certainly, anticipation, but also the faint sting of abandonment that had never fully healed, even after 6 years of these visits. 2 weeks is a long time, she said, sliding onto a kitchen stool. Are you sure you'll be okay without me? Now Bessie did turn, fixing her granddaughter with a look that managed to be both stern and tender. Child, I managed 58 years before you came along. I expect I can handle 14 days. Her expression softened. Besides, your father needs this time with you, needs to see the amazing young woman you're becoming. Liana ducked her head, uncomfortable with the praise, but warmed by it nonetheless. I'm just regular grandma. Bessie laughed the sound, rich and knowing. Ain't nothing regular about you, Alana Jackson. Never has been. She slid a cinnamon roll onto a plate and placed it before her granddaughter. Now eat up. Your daddy sent car service, and I expect that driver will be here right at 6:30. As Alana ate, she mentally reviewed her packing list, clothes, toiletries, summer reading assignments, the special simulator program her father had promised to show her at the university lab where he worked, and most importantly, the pocket watch that had belonged to her grandfather Wendell Jackson, the family's first pilot who'd flown with the Tuskegee Airmen decades before, was born. She touched her NASA t-shirt, the cotton worn soft from countless washings. Her grandfather had given it to her for her 8th birthday, the last one he'd lived to see. Future astronaut he'd called her, though her dreams had always been fixed more firmly on the cockpit than the stars. At precisely 6:30 a.m., a discreet black sedan pulled to the curb outside their apartment building. The driver, a Middle Eastern man in his 40s with kind eyes and a neat beard, loaded Ileana's single suitcase into the trunk, while Bessie fussed over last-minute details. You've got your phone charger, your medication, the emergency contact card. Yes, Grandma, Ilana said patiently. Same as the last 6 times. Bessie pulled her into a fierce hug that smelled of cinnamon and the lavender lotion she'd used for as long as I could remember. You call me the minute you land you here. Don't make me worry. I will, Liliana promised, returning the embrace before reluctantly pulling away. Love you more, Bessie replied, their ritual exchange as familiar as breathing. The drive to Charlotte Douglas International took 22 minutes in the light early morning traffic. Watch the city wake up around them. Convenience stores with their fluorescent lights already buzzing, early shift workers waiting at bus stops, joggers taking advantage of the relative cool before summer heat rendered the sidewalks uninhabitable. First time flying alone, the driver asked, meeting her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. No, sir, replied. I visit my dad in Boston a few times a year. Ah, good. You seem very, He paused, searching for the word composed. Most young people I drive to the airport are either bouncing with excitement or terrified. Liana smiled. Flying doesn't scare me. It never has. What she didn't say, what she rarely told anyone, was how flying made her feel. Not just the wonder of defying gravity or the thrill of acceleration, but something deeper, a sense of absolute rightness, as if the complex dance of physics and engineering that kept hundreds of tons of metal aloft was somehow written into her DNA. At the airport, the driver insisted on escorting her to the check-in counter despite her assurances that she knew the procedure. The transatlantic airlines representative, a tired L-looking woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, brightened visibly at the sight of Alana's unaccompanied minor paperwork. "Well, hello there," she said, her draw suggesting local roots. "Aren't you the independent young lady Boston today? Is it?" "Yes, ma'am," Ilana replied. "Flight 2257? The representative, Deborah, according to her name tag, tapped efficiently at her keyboard. "Let's get you all set. Your daddy's information is already in the system as your pickup person. Now we'll have you pre-board with our gate agent who will get you settled before the other passengers. You'll be in seat 14C window," Leena asked hopefully. Deborah checked her screen and smiled. "Aisle, honey, but I can see if—" "No, that's okay," Leanna said quickly. "Aisle is fine." In truth, she preferred it better for observing the flight crew, for noticing the subtle vibrations and sounds that told stories about the aircraft systems. After receiving her boarding pass and watching her suitcase disappear down the conveyor belt, was escorted to security by a customer service representative who seemed barely older than she was a college student, perhaps working summer hours. He handed her off to a TSA agent who guided her through the expedited lane with practiced efficiency. "You fly often?" the agent asked as reclaimed her backpack from the scanner. "Couple times a year?" She replied, checking to ensure her grandfather's watch was still safely wrapped in her sweatshirt where she'd packed it. "Well, you're a pro," he said approvingly. "Some adults could take lessons from you." At G7, Ileana presented herself to the gate agent, a tall black woman with elaborate braids and a name tag reading Jasmine. She checked documentation and made a note in the system. "Your flight's on time, sweetie. We'll start boarding in about 40 minutes. You can wait right over there." She pointed to a seating area near the desk. "And I'll come get you when it's time to pre-board." Leanna settled into the designated area, pulling out her phone to text her grandmother that she'd cleared security and was waiting at the gate. Then she extracted her physics textbook from her backpack. It wasn't a signed summer reading. That novel was buried at the bottom of her carry-on untouched, but rather her own interest. The particular volume, Principles of Aerodynamics, was university-level material her father had sent for her birthday in May. So absorbed was she in a chapter on fluid dynamics that she barely noticed the increasing activity around the gate until a shadow fell across her page. Looking up, she found herself facing a tall, broad-shouldered man in a pilot's uniform. Captain stripes adorned his sleeves, and the name Miller was embroidered above his breast pocket. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with closely cropped gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent decades at high altitude, heavy reading for summer vacation. He observed, nodding toward her textbook. Ilana straightened slightly. "It's interesting. I like understanding how things work." "Aerodynamics, huh?" He raised an eyebrow. "Planning to be an engineer." "Pilot," she replied without hesitation. "Commercial, then maybe test pilot eventually." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something less definable. Not quite dismissal, but perhaps a reflexive skepticism. It was an expression Ileana had encountered before when she shared her ambitions. "That's so," Captain Miller said, his tone neutral. "Well, it's good to have goals." He glanced at his watch. "I'd better get to my pre-flight checks." "Enjoy your book, young lady." As he walked away, I noticed he was headed toward her gate. With a small thrill of recognition, she realized he must be piloting her flight to Boston. She watched him join another uniformed figure, younger with sandy hair and a leaner build, at the gate desk. The co-pilot, she presumed. They conversed briefly with Jasmine before disappearing down the jetway. 45 minutes later, after the priority passengers had boarded, Jasmine approached with a smile. "Ready to go, Miss Jackson. We're boarding unaccompanied minors now." Liana gathered her belongings and followed the gate agent down the jetway. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with Karen on her name tag greeted them with practiced warmth. "Well, hello there. You must be our special passenger today," she said, accepting Alana's paperwork from Jasmine. "I'm Karen, and I'll be keeping an eye on you during our flight to Boston. We've got you in seat 14C right by the aisle. Let me show you the way." As they moved through first class and into the main cabin, eyes darted everywhere, noting the aircraft model Boeing 767-300ER, observing the configuration of exit rows, mentally calculating capacity based on seat arrangement. These details registered automatically, part of her lifelong fascination with aviation. "Here we are," Karen announced, stopping at row 14. "You're right here on the aisle. Can I help you stow your backpack? I've got it." "Thank you," replied, tucking her bag neatly under the seat in front of her. She buckled her seatbelt, immediately adjusting it to fit snugly across her hips as regulations required. Corin smiled approvingly. "I see you know the drill." "Perfect. If you need anything during the flight, just press the call button above you. One of our flight attendants will check on you periodically, but you seem like you'll be just fine." As the remaining passengers filed aboard, Iana settled in with her book again, half her attention on the routine announcements and procedures she could have recited from memory. The middle seat beside her remained empty until the last moments of boarding, when a harried-looking woman in her 70s dropped heavily into it. "Lord have mercy," the woman exhaled, arranging a large handbag on her lap. "I thought I was going to miss this flight." The security line was backed up, something fierce. She turned to Liana with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Hello, sweetheart. Traveling by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," Liana replied. "Visiting my dad in Boston." "Well, isn't that nice? I'm Mabel. Gonna see my new grandbaby. First one." Pride radiated from her as she pulled out her phone to display a photo of a pink-faced infant swaddled in a hospital blanket. Born 2 days ago, couldn't get on a flight any sooner. For what with the summer travel season? Alana made appropriate, admiring comments about the baby, then returned to her book as Mabel settled in, though she found it harder to concentrate with the plane, now full of chattering passengers. The window seat in their row was occupied by a businessman in his 40s who had immediately donned noise-canceling headphones and closed his eyes, clearly signaling his disinterest in conversation. The cabin door closed with a distinctive thunk, and the aircraft began its push back from the gate. Aliana felt the familiar flutter of anticipation in her stomach as the safety demonstration began, not from nervousness, but from the pure pleasure of the experience about to unfold. She closed her book and tucked it away, wanting to be fully present for takeoff. The taxi to the runway was brief, Charlotte Douglas not yet busy at this early hour. As they took their position for departure, Ilana sensed rather than saw the pilots advancing the throttles. The powerful Rolls-Royce engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, pressing her gently back into her seat as the aircraft began to accelerate. Beside her, Mabel gripped the armrest tightly. "I never did get used to this part," she confessed. "Been flying for 50 years and my stomach still drops every time." Liana smiled reassuringly. "It'll be smooth today. Minimal crosswind, perfect visibility." Mabel gave her a surprised look, but before she could respond, the nose lifted and they were airborne, the ground falling away as the 767 climbed into the clear morning sky. Ilana watched the proceedings with quiet joy, noting the precise moment when the landing gear retracted with a mechanical thud she felt through the floor. The seatbelt sign dinged off at 10,000 FT, and the flight attendants began their service preparations. Alana extracted a notebook from her backpack and began making entries. Aircraft type, flight number, departure time, current weather conditions. She'd kept these logs since she was 9, documenting every flight with meticulous attention to detail. "My goodness," Mabel commented, peering at the notebook. "Are you some kind of junior air marshal?" Ileana laughed. "No, ma'am, I just like planes. I'm going to be a pilot someday." "Well, good for you," Mabel said with genuine enthusiasm. "When I was your age, they told girls they could only be stewardesses, and even then, only until they got married. Times sure have changed. Thank the Lord." Their conversation was interrupted by the beverage service. Karen, clearly remembering Ilana's unaccompanied minor status, gave her special attention. "What can I get for you, Miss Jackson? We've got all sorts of juices, sodas, water." "Apple juice, please." Ilana requested, accepting the plastic cup and package of pretzels with a thank you. The flight progressed normally for the first 30 minutes. Lana alternated between sipping her juice, making notes, and chatting with Mabel, who proudly showed her dozens of baby pictures sent by her daughter. The businessman in the window seat remained determinedly asleep or pretending to be. It was as they passed over Virginia that first noticed something unusual, a subtle vibration different from the normal operational feedback of the aircraft. Most passengers wouldn't have detected it, but to trained senses it registered as noteworthy. She paused in mid-sentence, head tilted slightly as she processed the sensation. "Something wrong, dear?" Mabel asked. "No," Leanna said slowly, "just thought I felt something odd," as if in response to her observation the captain's voice came over the PA system, the practiced calm of his tone belying attention that Aliana immediately recognized. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We're experiencing some mild turbulence as we approach a weather system. Nothing to be concerned about, but I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Please return to your seats and secure your seatbelts." Flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, checking seat belts and ensuring tray tables were stowed. When Karen passed their row, Ilana caught her attention. Excuse me," she said quietly. "Is there a problem with the hydraulic system?" Karen's professional smile faltered momentarily. "Why would you ask that?" "Sweetie, the vibration pattern. It's consistent with pressure fluctuations in the hydraulic lines. My grandfather used to talk about it." The flight attendant's expression shifted to polite dismissal. I'm sure everything's fine. Captain Miller is very experienced. You just keep your seatbelt fastened." "Okay." She moved on quickly, but noticed her speaking in low tones to another flight attendant further up the aisle, both glancing back in her direction. The vibration continued, barely perceptible but persistent, and now accompanied by an occasional metallic sound that raised the hair on Alana's arms. Something was wrong, something the crew knew about but wasn't announcing. Outside the windows, the clear blue sky had given way to thickening clouds, occasional lightning visible in the distance. The aircraft began to experience mild turbulence. Nothing serious yet, but enough to wake the businessman in the window seat and cause Mabel to clutch her armrests again. Just a little bumpy air reassured her seatmate even as her own concern deepened. The vibration was increasing in intensity, and she detected a subtle change in the engine note, a harmonic that shouldn't be present during normal operation. 10 minutes passed. The turbulence intensified, the aircraft occasionally dropping in short, stomach-lurching bursts that elicited gasps from various passengers. The cabin lighting flickered once, then stabilized. A baby began crying somewhere behind them. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt. "Young lady, the sign is on," Mabel protested, looking alarmed. "I need to speak to the flight attendant." Ilana explained, standing carefully in the aisle as the plane bucked beneath her. She made her way forward, one hand on the seats for balance, until she reached Karen, who was securing items in the galley. "You need to be in your seat with your seat belt fastened," the flight attendant said firmly. "There's a problem with the primary hydraulic system," stated, keeping her voice low to avoid alarming nearby passengers. "The pressure is inconsistent, and I think there might be a leak in the circuit. The pilots need to switch to the auxiliary system before." Corin's expression hardened. "How could you possibly know that? Please return to your seat immediately. My grandfather was a pilot." Ilana pressed. "He taught me how to recognize." "That's enough," Karen interrupted. "I understand you're probably nervous about the turbulence, but making up stories isn't helpful. Now back to your seat before you get hurt." As if to punctuate her words, the aircraft lurched violently, sending both of them grabbing for handholds. The overhead bins creaked ominously, and several oxygen masks dropped in the forward cabin, triggering screams from startled passengers. Over the PA system, the co-pilot's voice sounded strained. "Flight attendants, please prepare for immediate landing." Ileana met Karen's now worried eyes. "It's getting worse. Please just tell the captain what I said. Primary hydraulics to auxiliary. He'll understand." Something in her earnest intensity must have registered, because Karen hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Back to your seat now. I'll pass along your message." Lyanna returned to 14C, buckling in tightly as the plane continued to shake. Mabel was silently mouthing prayers, her rosary beads wound tightly around gnarled fingers. The businessman had abandoned all pretense of sleep and was gripping the window shade with white knuckles, staring out at the storm clouds now enveloping the aircraft. Lightning flashed alarmingly close, illuminating the cabin in stark white for an instant. The plane shuddered more violently, and a new sound joined the cacophony, a high-pitched hydraulic whine that confirmed Ilana's worst fears. The primary system was failing. Karen appeared at the forward cabin phone, speaking urgently into the handset while glancing back at Ilana. After a brief conversation, she replaced the handset and made her way down the aisle, fighting against the increasingly erratic movements of the aircraft. "The captain would like to know how you knew about the hydraulics," she said when she reached Ilana's seat, her previous skepticism replaced by cautious respect. "The vibration pattern is distinctive," Liliana explained quickly. "Did they switch to auxiliary? They're considering options." Karen hedged. Captain Miller asked if you have any other observations, closed her eyes briefly, focusing entirely on the sensations and sounds surrounding her. When she opened them again, her decision was made. "I need to speak to him directly. There's not much time." Karen looked shocked. "That's impossible. The cockpit is restricted. People will die if they don't get this right," Liana said with quiet certainty. "Including us." The conviction in her voice must have been compelling, because after a moment's hesitation, Karen said, "Wait here," and moved forward again, disappearing into the crew area. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next few minutes. The turbulence intensified to the point where loose items were flying through the cabin. The lighting failed completely for several seconds before emergency systems activated. Multiple oxygen masks had deployed, and the cabin altitude warning sounded briefly before being silenced from the cockpit. Ilana focused on staying calm, mentally reviewing everything her grandfather had ever taught her about aircraft emergency procedures. Beside her, Mabel had abandoned her prayers and was now clutching Leanna's hand with surprising strength. "Are we going to be okay?" the older woman whispered. Before Leanna could answer, Karen reappeared, her uniform disheveled and a thin trickle of blood running from a cut on her forehead where she'd apparently struck something during the turbulence. "Come with me," she said to her expression unreadable. Quickly, Ileana squeezed Mabel's hand reassuringly before unbuckling again. "It'll be all right," she promised, hoping she could make those words true. Following Karen was like navigating a ship in heavy seas. The aisle seemed to tilt and twist beneath their feet as they made their way forward. Passengers watched their progress with fearful curiosity, a few calling out questions that went unanswered as the two pressed on toward the cockpit. At the forward galley, another flight attendant, older, with cropped silver hair and a name tag reading Diane, looked at them in disbelief. "Karen, you can't be serious. She's a child." "Captain's orders," Karen replied tersely. "Get the crash kits distributed while I'm gone." The phrase "crash kits" sent a ripple of panic through nearby passengers who overheard. Diane shot her colleague a reproachful look before hurrying to comply. Karen swiped her credentials and entered a code on the cockpit door panel. After a moment, the reinforced door unlocked with a heavy click. She pushed it open, revealing the scene that began our story: two pilots fighting for control of a failing aircraft, warning lights bathing the flight deck in crimson, and the growing certainty that conventional solutions were not going to save them. "Sir," Karen began, her voice nearly lost in the cacophony of alarms. "This is the girl I mentioned." Captain Miller half turned his face, a mask of tension and disbelief. "This is completely irregular. We're in the middle of an emergency. The primary hydraulic system is compromised." Ileana interrupted, stepping fully into the cockpit. "The auxiliary circuit is still operational, but you need to disengage the primary first, or they'll conflict and you'll lose both." The statement, delivered with such technical precision and confidence, momentarily silenced even the co-pilot's protest. "How the hell would you know that?" Miller demanded, even as his hands continued to wrestle with the controls. "My grandfather was Wendell Jackson." Liana replied, the name clearly meaningless to the pilots. "He flew 767s for 20 years. He taught me everything." "Sir," the co-pilot Henderson cut in urgently. "We're losing altitude control. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." Another violent shudder ran through the airframe. The altimeter unwound alarmingly as the aircraft dropped several hundred feet in seconds. 27 seconds, Ileana said, her gaze fixed on the flight management system display. That's how long you have before the backup generator overloads too. The co-pilot swiveled toward her. How could you possibly know that? Because I've seen this before, answered. In simulator runs, my grandfather made sure I understood every failure scenario. Captain Miller's jaw tightened, a lifetime of training and authority wearing with the desperate reality facing him. His eyes met Alana's, searching, evaluating, coming to a decision that would define the remainder of his career, however long or short that might be. What's your name? He asked, his voice suddenly calm amid the chaos. Illy Jackson, sir. All right, Jackson, tell me exactly what to do. The next few minutes unfolded in a blur of technical communication. Liana directed a precise sequence of actions, systems to disconnect circuits to bypass manual overrides to engage. Her knowledge was comprehensive, her delivery assured beyond her years. The pilots followed her instructions with increasing confidence as the aircraft gradually stabilized, the most severe alarm silencing one by one. Henderson executed the final sequence and turned to her with undisguised amazement. It's working. The auxiliary hydraulics are responding. Captain Miller still focused on his controls, but now making visible progress against the aircraft's formerly erratic behavior, allowed himself a quick glance at Liana. Where did you learn all this? Even with a pilot in the family, this is extraordinary. Liana hesitated. My father works at MIT Aerospace Engineering. He runs simulation studies, failure scenarios. I've been helping him unofficially. A small, incredulous laugh escaped Henderson. Unofficially. You just saved 200 lives unofficially. We're not out of this yet. Miller cautioned, though the immediate crisis had clearly passed. We've still got to get this bird on the ground with limited systems. Baltimore is closest, suggested, pointing to the navigation display. 32 minutes at current speed, but you'll need to maintain this altitude. Descending too quickly will stress the auxiliary hydraulics. Miller studied her for a long moment, decades of experience and authority balanced against the evidence of her capabilities unfolding before him. Take the jump seat, he finally directed. Keep talking. Asiana secured herself in the observer's seat behind the pilots. Captain Miller's voice came over the PA system, remarkably steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced some systems malfunctions due to the storm, but we have the situation under control. As a precaution, we'll be diverting to Baltimore, where we expect to land in approximately 30 minutes. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. What he couldn't tell them was that under control was a relative term, or that their safe arrival now depended partly on the knowledge of a 13-year-old girl who'd never officially piloted anything. In the main cabin, passengers exchanged nervous glances. The turbulence had lessened somewhat, but the earlier chaos had left everyone on edge. Oxygen masks dangled from their compartments in several rows. Personal items scattered during the worst of the pitching had not been retrieved, giving the cabin a disheveled post-disaster appearance. Mabel clutched her rosary beads, eyes darting frequently to Aliana's empty seat as if its vacancy confirmed her worst fears. The businessman beside her had abandoned his aloof demeanor and was now engaged in intense conversation with passengers across the aisle, all of them speculating about what might really be happening. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, a remarkable collaboration was underway. Ilana provided ongoing assessment of the compromised systems while the pilots implemented adjusted procedures to compensate. Her understanding of the 760 Ascent's redundancy architecture proved invaluable as they navigated with limited hydraulic function and compromised electrical systems. The storm cell is moving northeast, Henderson noted, studying the weather radar. We should have a clearer approach in 20 minutes if we can maintain current parameters. Miller agreed, his hands still firm on the controls that required more manual input than usual with the automated systems partially compromised. You'll need to extend the landing gear manually, pointed out. The primary extension system uses the hydraulic circuit that's failed. Miller nodded grimly. I'm aware, done it in the simulator, but never in 30 years of actual flying. My grandfather did it once, Alana offered, over Denver. He said the key was timing. Not too early because of the drag, not too late because the manual system is slower. Henderson shot her another wondering look. Your grandfather taught you all this. How old are you? 13? And yes, he did. Every weekend from when I was 6 until he died 2 years ago. A flash of grief crossed her face before she continued. He said, "Knowledge saves lives." That some things are too important to wait until you're old enough. The conversation paused as Miller coordinated with air traffic control securing priority landing clearance at Baltimore Washington International. Listening to his calm professional communication, no one would guess at the struggle still ongoing to keep the aircraft stable. "We're cleared for runway 15R, he announced after completing the exchange. "Weather's improving ahead now. We just need to get there and land with compromised systems." Henderson added his tone, making it clear this was no small challenge. One problem at a time, Miller responded, a philosophy that had served him through countless situations in his long career. He glanced back at Leanna. "Any other insights from your grandfather about manual gear extension?" She considered for a moment. "He said to prepare for asymmetrical deployment. The nose gear might come down before the main gear or vice versa. You'll feel it in the handling." Miller nodded appreciatively. Smart man, your grandfather." The smartest agreed quietly. As Baltimore approached, the cockpit settled into focused preparation. Miller and Henderson ran through emergency checklists, while Ilana observed silently, occasionally offering a clarification when asked. The storm had indeed moved northeast as predicted, leaving them with improving visibility as they began their initial descent. Miller activated the cabin address again. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing in approximately 15 minutes. This will be a priority emergency landing. Implement full bracing procedures in the cabin." This announcement triggered a new wave of anxiety among passengers, but also a rush of activity from the crew. Karan and her colleagues moved efficiently through the aircraft, demonstrating brace positions and checking that seatbelts were securely fastened. They collected loose items, secured galley equipment, and briefed able-bodied passengers seated near emergency exits. "What's happening?" Mabel asked Karen anxiously as she passed. "Where's the girl who was sitting here? Is she all right?" Karen hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "She's helping the pilots," she said finally. "She has special knowledge about the aircraft systems." "That child," the businessman interjected incredulously. "What could she possibly know that professional pilots don't? Apparently quite a lot," Karen replied with a hint of defensiveness. "Now please focus on the brace position I showed you. When the captain gives the command, you'll need to react immediately." Back in the cockpit, they had descended to 12,000 naus. The sprawling expanse of the Baltimore-Washington metropolitan area, now visible through breaks in the clouds. Airport approach lights glimmered in the distance, a welcome sight after the preceding chaos. Beginning manual gear extension sequence, Miller announced, nodding to Henderson, who prepared to operate the rarely used crank mechanism that would physically force the landing gear down if the hydraulic system failed to deploy it. "Remember, steady pressure, advised, forcing it can jam the mechanism." Henderson began the laborious process, sweat beading on his forehead as he cranked the manual override. The effort required was substantial. On the system designed for emergency use rather than operational convenience, nose gear indicating down and locked. Miller reported, after a tense minute, one green indicator light illuminating on the panel. Still waiting on main gear, Henderson continued cranking. His breathing labored. "It's fighting me." "Something's not right. Try backing off a quarter turn, then applying pressure again," suggested. "Sometimes the sequence gets bound if the hydraulic pressure didn't fully release." Henderson followed her advice, surprise registering on his face when the resistance suddenly lessened. "It's working." Moments later, 2 more indicator lights confirmed the main landing gear was successfully deployed. A collective breath of relief filled the cockpit, though all 3 knew they were far from safe. Landing with compromised systems would require perfect execution. 5,000 EET, Miller announced as they continued their approach. Flaps 20. The runway was now clearly visible ahead. Emergency vehicles already positioned along its length. Standard procedure for an aircraft declaring an emergency landing. Fire trucks, ambulances, and airport operations vehicles formed a gauntlet of flashing lights awaiting their arrival. "Listen," Miller said, his voice taking on a new gravity. "When we're down, if we're down safely, there will be questions, investigations about how a 13-year-old civilian ended up in the cockpit during an emergency." "Sir," Henderson began, but Miller cut him off. "But Let me finish. What happened here today broke every protocol in the book, but it also saved lives, mine included. I want you both to know that whatever comes after, I take full responsibility for the decision to bring you in here." He nodded toward Alana, "and I'd make the same call again." "Thank you, sir," said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Miller replied, returning his full attention to the approach. "We've still got to stick the landing." The final approach was tense but controlled. Without full hydraulic pressure, the aircraft felt sluggish, requiring more input than usual to maintain the proper glide path. Miller handled the controls with the practiced expertise of thousands of landings, compensating for the compromised systems with subtle adjustments. One E-noter Sur-FT Henderson called out reading from the altimeter. Sync rate, nominal runway, in sight, continuing visual approach, Miller confirmed for both the cockpit voice recorder and Baltimore approach control monitoring their progress. 500 ED50 in the passenger cabin flight attendants' voices rang out in practiced unison. Brace, brace, heads down, stay down. Passengers assumed the protective position they'd been shown, many quietly praying or clutching the hands of strangers who in this moment of shared peril felt like closest kin. 200 Alfred Alana watched intently from the jump seat, every muscle tense as if she could will the aircraft safely to the ground through sheer concentration. She held her grandfather's pocket watch tightly in one hand, its familiar weight a talisman against disaster. 100 Miller's Miller's focus was absolute, his weathered hands guiding the massive aircraft with delicate precision despite the compromised controls. The runway threshold passed beneath them, concrete replacing the blur of approach lights. 50 FT-4030. The 767 settled toward the runway, flaring slightly as Miller pulled back on the yoke to arrest their descent rate for touchdown. 2010. The main landing gear made contact with a firm thud followed immediately by the nose gear. The entire airframe shuddered as reverse thrust engaged, the engines roar changing pitch as they worked to slow the aircraft's forward momentum. Thrust reversers operating. Henderson confirmed. Spoilers deployed manually. Without full hydraulic pressure, the braking action was less efficient than normal, requiring the entire length of the runway to gradually bleed off their speed. Emergency vehicles paced them down the tarmac, ready to respond at the first sign of trouble. Finally, wonderfully, the aircraft rolled to a complete stop near the far end of the runway. For a moment, absolute silence filled the cockpit, the sudden absence of engine noise and warning alarms almost disorienting after the preceding chaos. Then Miller's voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. Transatlantic 225V7 safely on the ground at Baltimore Washington International 10:42 local time. A cheer erupted from the passenger cabin tension, releasing in a cathartic wave of applause, laughter, and tears. Flight attendants moved quickly to secure exits and prepare for evacuation. Standard procedure following an emergency landing until the aircraft could be declared structurally sound. In the cockpit, Miller slumped slightly in his seat, the weight of responsibility momentarily lifting from his shoulders. He turned to face Alana, who remained quietly composed in the jump seat. "I've been flying commercially for 34 years, he said. "Never seen anything like what you just did." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Miss Jackson." Ilana shook his hand solemnly. "My grandfather always said knowledge was meant to be used when needed. I'm glad I could help." Henderson, completing the shutdown checklist despite his evident exhaustion, added his own acknowledgement. "I don't know what review board is going to believe this, but I'll testify to it until they take my license." Nobody's losing their license," Miller stated firmly. "We followed emergency protocols appropriate to the situation. The fact that our technical advisor was somewhat unconventional is secondary to the outcome." Before the conversation could continue, a transmission from ground control reminded them that emergency personnel were waiting to assess the aircraft. Standard evacuation procedures would commence momentarily. "We should join the passengers," Miller decided, powering down the remaining systems. "There will be time for debriefing later." As they prepared to leave, the cockpit hesitated. "Sir, may I ask you something?" "Of course. When I first spoke to you at the gate in Charlotte, when I told you I wanted to be a pilot, you didn't seem to think it was likely." Miller had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I've been flying since before there were many women in the profession, let alone black women." Ilana supplied when he trailed off. "Young women of any background," he corrected, though they both understood the unspoken reality. It's not that I didn't think it was possible, it's that I know how hard the path is, how many barriers still exist despite the progress we've made. My grandfather faced worse, Liliana said simply. He still flew. Miller nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his expression. Yes, he did, and clearly taught the next generation extraordinarily well. He gestured toward the door. After you, future Captain Jackson. The scene in the main cabin was controlled chaos. Passengers gathered their belongings. Flight attendants directed evacuation procedures, and emergency personnel stood by at the aircraft doors, ready to assist as needed. When Alana emerged from the cockpit, followed by the pilots, a momentary hush fell over the forward cabin. Mabel, who had made her way up the aisle against the flow of deplaning passengers, rushed forward when she spotted Alana. There you are. I was so worried when they wouldn't tell me where you'd gone. She enveloped the girl in a fierce hug before holding her at arm's length for inspection. Are you all right? What in heaven's name were you doing up there? Helping, Aliana said simply, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the ordeal now that the immediate danger had passed. Karen approached her professional demeanor firmly back in place, though her eyes betrayed her continued amazement. We're deplaning through the forward left door, she informed them. Emergency services will meet you in the terminal for evaluation. As the crew managed the orderly evacuation, word spread rapidly among the passengers about the remarkable role played by the young girl from seat 14C. Curious glances and whispered conversations followed Lyanna as she made her way toward the exit, still accompanied by the protective Mabel, who had apparently appointed herself temporary guardian. Did you really help fly the plane? A wide-eyed boy of about 7 asked as they passed his row. Not exactly, Ilana replied. I just knew some things about how it works. She knew exactly how it works. Captain Miller corrected overhearing as he supervised the evacuation and saved all our lives because of it. Outside on the tarmac, passengers descended air stairs to waiting buses that would transport them to the terminal. The mid-July Maryland sun beat down mercilessly after the artificial climate of the aircraft, making the short walk feel like a journey across a desert. Emergency medical technicians evaluated passengers as they deplaned, identifying a few who required further attention for minor injuries sustained during the turbulence. Alana found herself separated from Mabel in the processing, instead guided to a separate area where airline officials and airport authorities had gathered. Captain Miller and First Officer Henderson were already there, engaged in intense discussion with individuals in various uniforms and corporate attire. Is that her, one of the airline representatives asked as approached, escorted by an airport security officer who had been instructed to locate her. Miller turned, his expression softening slightly when he saw her. Yes, Jackson, the reason we're all standing here instead of sorting through wreckage. The blunt assessment caused several officials to shift uncomfortably, but no one contradicted him. A woman in a Transatlantic Airlines executive uniform stepped forward. Miss Jackson, I'm Diana Reeves, Chief Operating Officer for Transatlantic. We understand you provided assistance during today's incident. We'd like to talk with you about exactly what happened. Am I in trouble? Liliana asked directly, her composure remarkable for someone her age in such circumstances. Reeves glanced at Miller before responding. No, you're not in trouble, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, having a minor in the cockpit during an emergency is highly unusual. We need to understand the circumstances completely for our investigation. My father should be present for any questioning, said he's supposed to meet me in Boston, but given the diversion, we've already contacted him. Reeves assured her. Dr. Jackson is making arrangements to come to Baltimore as we speak. Until then, we just need some basic information to start our report. Over the next hour in a private conference room within the airport's administrative section, Ileana recounted the events from her perspective, noticing the hydraulic vibration, her conversation with Karen, and subsequently with the pilots. She explained her background knowledge from her grandfather's teachings and her father's simulator work, emphasizing that she had never physically operated the aircraft controls. Throughout her account, airline officials exchanged glances that ranged from skepticism to astonishment. Technical experts were called in to verify her descriptions of the aircraft systems, confirming that her understanding was not only accurate, but extraordinarily comprehensive. This is unprecedented. One of the FAA representatives commented, after she finished. We have no regulatory framework for evaluating civilian technical assistance of this nature, especially from a minor. Create one, Miller suggested bluntly, because what happened today goes beyond any checklist or protocol. We faced a cascading systems failure that conventional procedures weren't addressing. Miss Jackson provided the solution that saved Flight 2257. That's the only fact that matters. Before the discussion could continue, the conference room door opened and a man rushed in, tall and lean, with the same deep brown eyes, as though his were wide with worry behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ilana, Dr. Marcus Jackson exclaimed, crossing the room in 3 long strides to embrace his daughter. "Are you all right? They told me there was an emergency landing, that you were somehow involved." "I'm fine, Dad," she assured him, returning his hug before pulling back. "Really. The plane had hydraulic problems, and I remembered what Grandpa taught me." Marcus looked from his daughter to the assembled officials, reality dawning on his face. "She was in the cockpit during an emergency. Your daughter's knowledge of Boeing 767 systems prevented what could have been a catastrophic outcome." Captain Miller stated, "I made the decision to bring her into the cockpit based on information she provided that proved accurate and critical." Marcus ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, processing this information. "The simulations," he murmured almost to himself. "All those hours in the lab." Dr. Jackson, Diana Reeves interjected, "We understand your daughter has been informally trained in aircraft systems through your work at MIT. Marcus straightened, his academic demeanor asserting itself. "My research focuses on human-machine interface and complex aviation systems. Ilana has been my unofficial research assistant since she was 9. Her grandfather, my father, was a commercial pilot who recognized her aptitude early and began teaching her. Between the two of us," he trailed off, looking at his daughter with new understanding. "Apparently we created an aviation prodigy." "That's putting it mildly," Henderson commented. "She diagnosed a complex hydraulic failure faster than 2 professional pilots with 40 years of combined experience. We'll need a full statement from you as well, Dr. Jackson." The FAA representative noted, "This situation raises numerous questions about training emergency protocols and perhaps even future programs for identifying specialized aptitudes in aviation." Of course, Marcus agreed. "Marcus, but first, my daughter needs rest and probably food. It's been a traumatic day, regardless of how calm she appears." Ileana, who had indeed maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her at her father's words. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. "There will be time for complete debriefings later." Reeves conceded, "We've arranged accommodations for both of you at the airport hotel. Transportation and meals will be provided, of course." As they prepared to leave, Captain Miller approached one last time. "Before you go, I want you to have this." He unpinned the captain's wings from his uniform and held them out to her. "These were given to me when I made captain 20 years ago. I'd be honored if you'd accept them." Ilana stared at the gleaming wings, their significance not lost on her. "I can't take your wings, sir." "You've earned them." Miller insisted, "more than many who wear them officially. Consider it a down payment on the ones you'll receive when you complete your own training." He glanced at Marcus. "With your father's permission, of course." Marcus nodded, visibly moved. "I think my father would approve." Lyanna accepted the wings carefully, their weight in her palm feeling simultaneously foreign and familiar. "Thank you, Captain Miller. I look forward to flying with Captain Jackson someday." He replied with a genuine smile, though preferably under less dramatic circumstances. As Ilana and her father were escorted from the conference room, they passed a growing media presence in the terminal. News of the emergency landing had spread quickly, and early reports had begun to filter out about the remarkable role played by a young passenger. Cameras turned in their direction, reporters called out questions, but security personnel maintained a protective barrier around them. "Is that her, the girl who saved the plane? Dr. Jackson, can you comment on your daughter's involvement? How does a 13-year-old know how to handle an aircraft emergency?" Marcus kept close, shielding her from the barrage as they made their way to the waiting airport shuttle. "Don't engage," he murmured. "There'll be time for statements once we've had a chance to rest and process what happened." In the quiet of the shuttle, Iana finally allowed herself to relax, the full weight of the day's events settling over her. She reached into her pocket, fingers closing around her grandfather's watch. "Grandpa would have been proud," Marcus said softly, noticing the gesture. "I heard his voice," Ilana admitted, "when I was in the cockpit, like he was right there talking me through it." Marcus put an arm around her shoulders. He was in a way through everything he taught you, through the love he put into making sure you understood his world. Captain Miller didn't think I could be a pilot when I first told him. I could see it in his face. And now a small smile formed on Eliana's lips. "Now I think he'd recommend me for flight school tomorrow if he could. The world has a way of underestimating extraordinary people until they prove themselves undeniable," Marcus observed. "Your grandfather knew that better than most. It's why he invested so much in you. He saw what others might not take the time to see." The shuttle arrived at the airport hotel where staff had been alerted to their arrival. They were quickly checked in and escorted to a suite on the top floor, away from the growing media presence in the lobby. "Try to rest," Marcus suggested once they were alone. "Tomorrow will bring more questions, more attention than you've ever experienced. You should be prepared. I don't want attention," Ilana said suddenly, sounding very much her age. "I just did what needed to be done." Marcus regarded his daughter thoughtfully. "That's exactly what makes you extraordinary, Aliana. Not just your knowledge, but your instinct to apply it when needed, regardless of who might doubt you." He hesitated before adding, "Your mother would be so proud." The mention of her mother, gone 6 years now after a brief, brutal battle with cancer, brought unexpected tears to Alana's eyes. The emotional dam that had held firm through crisis finally began to crack. "I was scared, Dad," she confessed, voice small. "I knew what to do, but I was still scared." "Of course you were," he said, gathering her close. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about acting despite it. That's what you did today. That's what heroes do." Ashiana finally surrendered to exhaustion, sleeping deeply in the hotel suite while her father kept watch. The story of Flight 2257 was already spreading across news outlets nationwide. Initial reports were fragmented and often inaccurate, focusing on the miracle landing rather than the specific role played by a young passenger. But as crew members and passengers shared their experiences with media, a more complete picture began to emerge. By evening, major networks were running headlines that would have seemed implausible that morning. 13-year-old girl helps guide emergency landing of commercial airliner. Young aviation prodigy assists pilots during mid-air crisis. Teens' extraordinary knowledge prevents potential disaster in living rooms across America. People watched in fascination as the unlikely story unfolded. For some viewers, especially those from older generations who had witnessed the slow, often painful integration of commercial aviation, the image of a young black girl in the cockpit represented more than just an individual triumph. It symbolized how far the industry had come and how far it still had to go. The next morning dawned clear and warm in Baltimore. Alana woke to find her father already dressed and fielding calls, his professor's demeanor firmly in place as he managed the growing interest in their story. He smiled when he noticed her watching him. "Good morning, aviation celebrity," he said, setting aside his phone. "How did you sleep?" "Like I'd been through an aviation emergency," she replied with a hint of her usual humor. "What's happening?" "The airline is holding a press conference at 10 Nazibrid. They've asked if we'd participate. It's strictly optional. They assure me the FAA investigation is proceeding, but preliminary findings confirm everything you described about the hydraulic system failure." "And Captain Miller, First Officer Henderson, both fine." Currently in debriefing sessions, Marcus hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Your story has resonated with people. It's everywhere. News, social media. People are calling you the teenage aviation whisperer." Alana groaned. "That's horrible, perhaps, but it speaks to the impact of what you did. This isn't just about one flight anymore, Lana. It's becoming a conversation about opportunity, about recognizing talent wherever it appears." He studied her carefully. "How do you feel about participating in the press conference?" "You can decline. No one would blame you." Ileana considered the question, remembering her grandfather's voice. "Knowledge is meant to be shared. Little one." "What good is understanding if you keep it to yourself?" "I'll do it," she decided. "But I'm not a whisperer. I just understand how planes work. I'll make sure they get that right," Marcus promised. The press conference was held in a large meeting room at the airport, hastily converted to accommodate the unexpected media interest. Transatlantic executives sat at a long table flanked by FAA officials and airport authorities. Captain Miller and First Officer Henderson were present in fresh uniforms, their expressions professionally neutral despite the extraordinary circumstances. When Airline entered with her father, a ripple of murmurs ran through the assembled press corps. Few had expected someone so young despite the reports. She was dressed simply in a fresh outfit the airline had provided, dark jeans and a button-down shirt, her hair neatly braided. Captain Miller's wings were pinned carefully to her collar. Diana Reeves opened the proceedings with a prepared statement. Yesterday, Transatlantic Flight 2257 experienced a critical systems failure during severe weather conditions en route from Charlotte to Boston. Thanks to the exceptional skill of our flight crew and the unprecedented assistance of a passenger with specialized knowledge, the aircraft landed safely at Baltimore Washington International with no serious injuries reported. She continued with technical details of the incident before introducing Captain Miller, who provided his perspective on the emergency response. His account was measured and precise until he reached the decision to allow Aliana into the cockpit. In my 34 years of commercial aviation, I have never encountered a situation quite like this. He admitted the choice to bring a young passenger into the flight deck during an emergency violated standard protocols. It was also without question the right decision. Miss Jackson's extraordinary knowledge of our aircraft systems provided critical insights that directly contributed to the safe landing of Flight 2257. As pilot in command, I take full responsibility for this decision and stand by it completely. When it was turn, a hush fell over the room. She approached the microphone with the same quiet composure she'd shown throughout the ordeal, though those watching closely might have noticed her tight grip on her father's hand. "My name is Alana Jackson." She began, her voice steady despite the forest of cameras trained on her. "Yesterday, I was just a passenger on Flight 2257 traveling to visit my father in Boston. When I noticed signs of a hydraulic system malfunction, I shared what I knew with the flight crew." She explained briefly how her grandfather, a veteran pilot, had begun teaching her about aircraft systems from an early age, and how her father's research had furthered her education. She emphasized that she had never physically operated the aircraft, but merely provided technical information that the professional pilots used to resolve the emergency. Captain Miller and then First Officer Henderson are the real heroes, she concluded. They had the skill to implement the necessary procedures and the wisdom to listen even when the information came from an unexpected source. I'm just glad I could help. The modesty of her statement, delivered with such genuine sincerity, seemed to touch even the most cynical reporters in the room. When the floor opened for questions, they were directed initially toward the airline executives and aviation authorities, focusing on technical aspects of the incident and regulatory implications. Eventually, however, attention shifted to Ilana. "Miss Jackson, one reporter asked, many people twice your age would have panicked in such a situation. How did you remain so calm?" Ileana considered the question. "My grandfather always said that in aviation, panic is a luxury you can't afford. He taught me that knowledge plus clear thinking equals survival. I just tried to remember everything he showed me." "Do you plan to become a pilot yourself?" another called out. A small smile touched her lips. "Yes, commercial first, then maybe test pilot. That's been my plan since I was 6. After yesterday's events, how do you think the aviation industry should change its approach to recognizing and developing talent?" This question gave her pause. She glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "I think," she began carefully, "that expertise can come from unexpected places. My grandfather was part of the Tuskegee Airmen. He faced barriers because of who he was, not what he knew. I faced skepticism yesterday for the same reason. People saw my age, my gender, my race before they saw my knowledge." She straightened slightly. "Aviation safety depends on having the best information available, regardless of who provides it. That's what Captain Miller understood yesterday, and why we're all here today." The press conference concluded shortly after, but the conversation had initiated was just beginning. In the days that followed, her story catalyzed discussions across the aviation industry and beyond about talent recognition, about barriers to entry, about the sometimes arbitrary ways credentials are valued over demonstrable knowledge. Transatlantic Airlines, recognizing both a public relations opportunity and a genuine chance for positive change, announced the establishment of the Airline Jackson Scholarship for young people from underrepresented backgrounds with demonstrated aptitude for aviation. Captain Miller, in a move that surprised no one who had witnessed his evolution over the past 48 hours, volunteered to serve on the selection committee. The FAA investigation eventually concluded that while protocols had technically been breached by allowing a civilian minor into the cockpit during an emergency, the exceptional circumstances and positive outcome justified the decision. New guidelines were proposed for identifying and utilizing specialized expertise during in-flight emergencies, regardless of the source. As for Alana herself, she returned to Charlotte with her father once the immediate aftermath had settled. Her scheduled 2-week visit to Boston extended indefinitely by mutual agreement. The media attention gradually waned, though occasional interview requests still arrived, particularly from aviation publications and educational organizations interested in her unique learning journey. 1 month after Flight 2257, Ilana sat on the porch of her grandmother's apartment, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the Charlotte skyline. Bessie brought out glasses of sweet tea, settling into the rocking chair beside her granddaughter. "Your grandfather used to love watching storms," Bessie remarked. "Said they reminded him of how small we all are, how much bigger than us the world is." "I still hear his voice sometimes," Ilana admitted, "especially when I'm thinking about planes. That's because he poured so much of himself into teaching you." Bessie reached over to pat her hand. "He saw something special in you from the beginning, called you his legacy." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to rain patter against the awning. Finally, Bessie spoke again. "The Captain Miller called again today. Said, some flight school in Atlanta wants to offer you a spot in their youth program full scholarship." She gave her granddaughter a sidelong glance. "Seems like doors are opening all over the place." Nodded, turning her grandfather's pocket watch over in her hands, a habit she developed since the incident. "They want me because of what happened on the plane." "Maybe at first," Bessie acknowledged, "but they'll keep you because of who you are and what you know. That's always been true, Sugar. The hard part is getting people to look past what they think they see, like a 13-year-old girl who couldn't possibly understand hydraulic systems." Exactly like that. Bessie's smile held decades of wisdom. "Your grandfather used to say that excellence is the best answer to doubt. You proved him right." As the storm began to clear, sunlight breaking through clouds in dramatic golden shafts, Ileana thought about the path ahead. The scholarship offers the mentorship opportunities, the accelerated training programs suddenly available to her, all because of a crisis that had forced the right people to see beyond their expectations. "I think I want to accept the Atlanta program," she decided. "It's close enough that I can still live with you, but it's the most comprehensive curriculum." "Then that's what we'll do." Bessie nodded firmly. "Your grandfather always said, if you're going to fly, fly with the best." 2 days later, I received an unexpected package at the apartment. Inside was a leather-bound logbook with her name embossed on the cover and a handwritten note. For the hours you'll log on your journey from here, the sky has been waiting for you, Captain James Miller." Beneath the logbook lay a set of pilot's wings, not the ceremonial captain's wings Miller had given her after the emergency landing, but training wings, official ones, the kind given to aviation students at the beginning of their formal instruction. Aliana traced the metal contours with her finger, feeling the weight of history and future possibility merged in a single symbol. Her grandfather had worn wings like these, once blazing a trail through barriers of prejudice and limitation. Now she would wear them too, continuing a legacy while forging her own path. Outside her window, a commercial airliner traced a white contrail across the blue Carolina sky, perhaps transatlantic, perhaps another carrier, its passengers trusting in the knowledge and skill of those guiding them safely to their destination. Someday she would be the one they trusted. Someday she would be the captain, making the difficult calls, recognizing expertise wherever it appeared. But first, there were lessons to complete, knowledge to master, skills to perfect. The journey would be long and challenging, filled with tests, both expected and unforeseen. Liana Jackson was ready for all of it. She tucked her grandfather's watch into her pocket, placed Captain Miller's training wings carefully beside her grandfather's Tuskegee Airman photograph and opened the new logbook to its first blank page. In careful handwriting, she recorded a single entry, July 12, 2023. Transatlantic Flight 2257, Charlotte to Baltimore emergency diversion. Aircraft Boeing 767-300, ER position technical advisor, hours 1.5 remarks. First unofficial flight. It was, she knew, just the beginning. If this extraordinary story moved you, please subscribe and comment below with your thoughts. Sadio, have you ever witnessed someone young show exceptional knowledge or skill that surprised the adults around them? Share your experiences. Your story might inspire others just like Alana's has done. The remarkable thing about moments of crisis is how they strip away our preconceptions, forcing us to recognize truth rather than assumption. For Captain James Miller, that moment came at 37,000 dB when the choice between protocol and survival revealed itself in the unexpected form of a 13-year-old girl who understood his aircraft better than anyone had a right to expect. For Ayanna Jackson, it was the culmination of years of overlooked preparation, hours spent with her grandfather in simulators, weekends absorbed in technical manuals, while her peers focused on social media, quiet observations from airplane aisle seats that few adults would have noticed, let alone interpreted correctly. And for the aviation industry itself, Flight 2257 became a case study in the dangers of dismissing expertise based on its packaging rather than its substance, a lesson with implications far beyond the specific circumstances of a single emergency landing. 3 months after that fateful flight, Ilana stood on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the youngest participant in the Advanced Aviation Youth Program by a margin of nearly 3 years. Round her teenagers from across the country, all gifted, all passionate about flight, prepared for their first official training exercise. Unlike Alana, most of them had never set foot in a cockpit during an actual emergency. Unlike Alayana, none of them wore captain's wings pinned beside their student identification. The instructor, a retired Air Force pilot with 30 years of experience, approached her with poorly concealed curiosity. Since the program's founding 15 years earlier, he had taught hundreds of aspiring aviators, but never one who had made national news before their first lesson. "Miss Jackson," he said, extending his hand, "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation precedes you." "Thank you, sir." Ilana replied, her handshake firm despite her nerves. "But I'm here to learn just like everyone else." The instructor's expression suggested he knew better, but he nodded respectfully. "Of course. Though I must admit this is the first time I've taught someone who's already handled a 767 emergency. I didn't handle it corrected. I just provided information to the pilots who did. There's still so much I need to learn." Her humility was genuine, her determination to be treated like any other student evident in every interaction. Yet there was no denying the subtle difference she received from both instructors and peers, not because of her brief fame, but because of the quiet confidence she carried, the depth of knowledge that occasionally revealed itself in casual conversation, the way she moved around aircraft with the familiarity of someone returning home. That evening in the small apartment she now shared with her father near the training facility, Marcus found her studying the next day's lesson with the same intensity she applied to everything aviation related. "How was the first day?" he asked, setting a mug of hot chocolate beside her, a tradition from her childhood that had survived her growing sophistication in other areas. "Good," she replied without looking up from her materials. "We reviewed basic aerodynamic principles. Tomorrow we start on actual flight systems." Marcus smiled, knowingly material you could probably teach yourself. Now she did look up, her expression serious. "That's not the point, Dad. I need to understand it the way they teach it. Follow the proper sequence. No shortcuts. Your grandfather would approve of that approach." Marcus observed, taking a seat across from her. "He always said the fundamentals matter most, even for natural talents." Lyanna nodded, reaching instinctively for the pocket watch that rarely left her possession these days. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't been on that flight. If someone else had been in seat 14C, but you were there," Marcus reminded her gently. "And you were prepared even though neither you nor anyone else could have predicted the exact circumstances where your knowledge would be needed. Captain Miller called yesterday. Ilana said, changing the subject slightly. He's back on active flight status. The airline cleared him completely as they should have. His decision saved lives. He said he started asking younger crew members for their input during pre-flight briefings, creating a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up regardless of their position. A small smile touched her lips. He said, "It's the Ilana Jackson protocol, unofficial, of course." Marcus laughed. "You've made quite an impression on a man who's probably not easily impressed." "He made an impression on me too," Ilana admitted. "It takes courage to listen when everything in your training tells you not to. To trust someone who, on paper, has no authority or credentials." She hesitated. "That's the kind of pilot I want to be someday. The kind who recognizes that good information can come from anywhere." As her training progressed over the following months, Ileana's exceptional aptitude became impossible to ignore despite her efforts to blend in with her peers. She completed simulator challenges in record time, memorized system specifications after single readings, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior that instructors typically saw only in experienced pilots. Yet for all her natural talent, she remained one of the hardest working students in the program, often the first to arrive and the last to leave, constantly seeking additional information, refusing to rely on ability alone when discipline could strengthen it further. By the 6-month mark program, administrators had developed a modified curriculum for her, accelerating certain aspects while ensuring she still mastered every required element. Her progress was closely monitored, not just by the program itself, but by Transatlantic Airlines, whose scholarship foundation was now funding additional specialized training for her. On a clear spring morning, almost a year after Flight 2257, Ilana prepared for another milestone, her first official flight as a student pilot. Not in a commercial airliner, of course, but in a Cessna 172, the standard training aircraft used by the program for introductory flight instruction. Her instructor, Captain Sarah Nuon, a former military pilot with a reputation for exacting standards, reviewed the pre-flight checklist with her one final time. "You've memorized all this," I'm sure Nuon commented, noting the ease with which recited procedures she'd studied for months. "Yes, ma'am," confirmed, "but I still want to go through it step by step. My grandfather always said checklists exist because memory fails, but paper doesn't." Nuon smiled approvingly. "Smart man, your grandfather, especially in aviation where one missed item can make all the difference." She gestured toward the aircraft waiting on the tarmac. "Ready to make this official?" Ileana nodded, unable to completely suppress the excitement bubbling beneath her professional demeanor. In this moment, her hands on actual controls, legitimate authority to pilot an aircraft, even under supervision, had been her dream for as long as she could remember. The flight itself was basic takeoff, simple maneuvers landing. But for Ilana, it represented something profound. Not just the beginning of her formal piloting career, but a validation of the path that had brought her here. From her grandfather's early lessons to the unexpected crucible of Flight 2257, as the Cessna lifted off Georgia, spreading beneath them in a patchwork of green and urban development, Captain Nuon observed her young student with quiet assessment. Ileana's hands on the controls were confident but respectful, her awareness of the aircraft's behavior comprehensive, her communication precise. She flew not with the tentative caution of most beginners, but with the measured respect of someone who understood both the freedom and responsibility of flight. "You've been waiting for this a long time, haven't you?" Nuon asked as they leveled off at 3,000 all-weather feet under Atlanta's skyline visible in the distance. "Yes, ma'am, since I was 6. "It shows." The instructor gestured toward the horizon. "Take us east for a bit. Let's see how you handle some basic navigation." As Ilana adjusted their course, Nuon continued her observation, noting the natural economy of the girl's movements. The way she scanned instruments in the proper sequence, her awareness of their position relative to the airport. These were habits that typically took students dozens of flight hours to develop, yet seemed instinctive to her. "You know," Nuon said casually, "in all my years of instruction, I've never taught someone who helped prevent an airline disaster before their first lesson." Ileana kept her eyes on the instruments, but a slight flush colored her cheeks. "I just applied what I knew. The pilots did the real work. That's not how Captain Miller tells it. We served together in the Air Force Reserves years ago. He says, you diagnosed a problem 2 veteran pilots couldn't identify in time. I had different perspective. Oleana explained, as a passenger, I felt vibrations they might not notice from the cockpit, and I recognized the pattern because my grandfather made sure I understood every potential failure scenario. Nguyen nodded thoughtfully. Perspective matters in aviation. So does preparation for scenarios you hope never to encounter. She studied Liana's profile, serious beyond her years, yet still unmistakably young. Your story has changed things, not just for you, but for how we think about training, about who might have valuable input during emergencies. I didn't mean to change anything, said softly. I just wanted to help. The most significant changes often come from people who weren't trying to make history, just doing what needed to be done in the moment. Nguyen checked their position before continuing. The airline industry can be slow to evolve, resistant to outsider perspectives. What happened on that flight forced a conversation that was long overdue. The remainder of the flight passed in focused concentration as demonstrated basic maneuvers, each executed with precision that belied her limited formal training. When they finally touched down, the landing smoother than many students achieved after dozens of attempts, Nguyen made a single notation in Alana's new official logbook. Natural aviator, exceptional situational awareness, and aircraft feel. As they walked back toward the operations building, the instructor asked a question that had clearly been on her mind throughout the session. What was it like being in that cockpit during a real emergency, knowing lives depended on your knowledge? Ileana considered the question, carefully clarifying. She finally answered. Everything that wasn't immediately relevant just disappeared. All that mattered was communicating what I knew as clearly as possible. That's what makes a great pilot, Nguyen observed. Ability to focus absolutely on what matters, when it matters, filtering out everything else. She stopped walking, turning to face her student directly. You're going to have an extraordinary career, Alana Jackson, and a lot of people are going to be watching your progress. Some hoping you succeed, others waiting for you to fail. I know Ilana acknowledged, I've already seen both. The best response to either group is the same, excellent, so consistent it becomes undeniable. Nguyen smiled slightly. Based on today's flight, you're well on your way. That evening, Aliana called her grandmother, as she did every Wednesday, sharing details of her first official flight with the woman who had supported her aviation dreams from the beginning. Lord, I wish your grandfather could have seen this day. Bessie said, her voice thick with emotion even through the phone connection, his little co-pilot finally in the left seat. I felt him with me, Ileana confessed, same as on flight 2257. Like he was right there in the cockpit. Because he put so much of himself into teaching you, Bessie affirmed. That kind of legacy doesn't disappear. After the call, Ilana sat at her desk, her new logbook open beside her grandfather's old one, which Marcus had given her after the transatlantic incident. The contrast was striking, one filled with decades of flights across multiple aircraft types, the other containing just a single entry from today, the first of what she hoped would be thousands to come. She ran her fingers over her grandfather's handwriting notes from flights taken before she was born, recognizing in his methodical documentation the origins of her own precise approach to aviation. Then she turned to her father's latest research paper propped against her desk lamp, a scholarly examination of knowledge transfer in aviation emergencies with Flight 2257 as its central case study. 3 generations of Jacksons, each contributing to her presence in that cockpit last July. Each part of whatever pilot she would eventually become. The responsibility of that legacy sat heavily upon her 14-year-old shoulders. Yet it was a weight she welcomed, even embraced. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Miller. Heard about your first official flight today. Congratulations. Keep that logbook. Current airline minimums come faster than you think. She smiled at his ongoing mentorship. Another unexpected gift from that harrowing day. Since their initial meeting at Charlotte Douglas International, Miller had become a steadfast advocate for her training, occasionally sending technical materials or simulator scenarios he thought might interest her. More significantly, he had begun speaking publicly about the experience, challenging the aviation community to reconsider its sometimes rigid hierarchies of knowledge and authority. As Lana prepared for bed, she noticed her NASA t-shirt, the one she'd worn on Flight 2257, now framed on her wall alongside her grandfather's Tuskegee Airman photograph and Captain Miller's wings. Artifacts of a journey that had begun long before she understood its significance. Touchstones of a future still taking shape. Tomorrow would bring more lessons, more simulator hours, more gradual accumulation of the skills and certifications that would eventually transform her from promising student to professional pilot. The path remained long and demanding, but Jackson had never been one to shy away from difficult journeys, especially those that led to the sky. If you've been inspired by Lana's extraordinary journey, subscribe now and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What obstacles have you overcome through knowledge and preparation? How has someone believing in you changed your path? Your story matters to our community. 2 years after Flight 2257, on a humid summer afternoon, 16-year-old Jackson stood on the observation deck at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, watching Transatlantic Airlines Flight 892 taxi toward its departure runway. Though no longer the nervous flyer she'd once been, Captain James Miller still texted her before his flights, a ritual that had evolved from mentorship into friendship over the months since their shared experience. Taking the red-eye to Seattle, his message read, "New first officer today. Trying that protocol. We talked about asking for observations regardless of rank. We'll let you know how it goes." She smiled, composing a quick response. "Safe flights, Captain. Remember what my grandfather said. The airplane doesn't care who's right, only what's right." Tucking away her phone, Ileana returned her attention to the bustling operations below. In the 2 years since the emergency landing that had changed her life, she had progressed through her training program at an unprecedented pace, accumulating certifications and flight hours that placed her well ahead of traditional timelines. The Alana Jackson Scholarship had expanded beyond her to support 15 other promising young aviators from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in commercial aviation. More significantly, her story had catalyzed meaningful changes within the industry itself. The FAA had implemented new guidance on incorporating specialized expertise during in-flight emergencies regardless of source. Major airlines had revised their crew resource management training to emphasize the importance of communication across traditional authority boundaries. Captain Miller had become a sought-after speaker on the topic, sharing their experience as a case study in the potentially life-saving value of unconventional knowledge sources. For Alana herself, the journey continued with focused determination. Next month, she would begin specialized training on multi-engine aircraft, another step toward her commercial pilot certification. Her father had accepted a permanent position at Georgia Tech. To remain close to her training program, their shared passion for aviation, finding new expression in collaborative research on emergency response protocols. As the Flight 892 lifted off, climbing smoothly into the afternoon sky, felt the familiar surge of joy that accompanied every takeoff she witnessed. Since earliest childhood, flight had represented possibility to her, the human capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges through knowledge, skill, and courage. What had happened on Transatlantic 2257 was in many ways the perfect distillation of that belief, a situation where conventional approaches were failing, where survival demanded looking beyond established hierarchies to recognize value wherever it appeared. That a 13-year-old black girl from Charlotte had been the one to provide that value only underscored the lesson's importance. Her phone buzzed again, not Captain Miller this time, but a notification from the training academy. Her instructor for tomorrow's session had requested an early start to take advantage of optimal weather conditions. Lyanna confirmed immediately, already mentally reviewing the maneuvers they would practice. As she turned to leave the observation deck, she noticed a young girl watching the departing flights with the same rapt attention she herself had shown at that age. No more than 7 or 8, with bright eyes and natural hair, styled in puffs secured with colorful bands, the child was explaining something about wing design to a patient father who nodded encouragingly at her enthusiasm. Lyanna smiled in recognition of a kindred spirit, another young aviation enthusiast perhaps at the beginning of her own journey toward the sky. On impulse, she approached them, careful not to interrupt the child's animated explanation. "Excuse me," she said, when there was a natural pause. "I couldn't help overhearing. You seem to know a lot about airplanes." The girl looked up, momentarily shy, before excitement overtook hesitation. I love planes. I'm going to be a pilot when I grow up. Is that right? Lana replied with genuine interest. That's my plan too. Really. The girl's eyes widened. Are you in pilot school? I am, Iana confirmed, and from what I heard you saying about wing design, you've already got a good start on the knowledge you'll need. The father, watching this exchange with appreciation, extended his hand. Marcus Wright, and this is my daughter Zoe. She's been airplane obsessed since she could talk. Alana Jackson. She introduced herself, noting the flash of recognition in the man's eyes. Her name still occasionally triggered such responses, though less frequently as time passed and newer stories captured public attention. Wait, he said, confirming her observation. Are you the Alana Jackson from that flight a couple years ago? She nodded, slightly embarrassed, but unwilling to deny her identity, especially with young Zoe looking increasingly curious about this new dimension to their conversation. What flight? The girl demanded, looking between the adults. This young lady helped save an airplane when she was just a little older than you are now, her father explained. It was quite a story. Zoe's expression transformed from curiosity to awe. You saved a whole airplane. How Ileana crouched to the girl's level, choosing her words carefully. I knew some things about how airplanes work because my grandfather taught me, just like you're learning now. When there was a problem, I was able to help the pilots understand what was happening. Were you scared? Zoe asked the question, cutting straight to what a child would naturally wonder. Yes, Ilana admitted, but I was more focused on remembering everything I'd learned so I could explain it clearly. She glanced up at Marcus. Right. Your daughter asks good questions, important ones. She always has, he agreed proudly. Been trying to understand how things work since she could point and ask why. That's a valuable quality in aviation, Liana told him before turning back to Zoe. Keep asking those questions, keep learning about planes, and maybe someday you'll be the one helping when knowledge is needed. As she stood to leave, Iana reached into her bag and extracted one of the future aviator's pins she'd received from her training program, small metal wings designed to encourage young people interested in flight careers. She offered it to Zoe, who accepted it with reverent hands. For your journey, said, it's just beginning. Walking away, she felt a profound sense of continuity, the legacy her grandfather had passed to her, now extending forward through her own modest encouragement of another young girl fascinated by flight. The technical knowledge that had saved Transatlantic 2257 was only part of what needed preservation and transmission. Equally important was the belief that boundaries, whether of age, gender, race, or conventional credential, should never limit the recognition of valuable expertise. That evening, as she reviewed materials for the next day's training, received a final text from Captain Miller, made it to Seattle. New first officer had excellent observation about an anomaly in the fuel balancing system. I might have missed. The Alana protocol works. Keep flying, future Captain Jackson. She smiled, sending back a simple Roger that before returning to her studies, preparing for whatever challenges tomorrow's flight might bring, confident in the knowledge that had already carried her through far greater tests than most pilots face in a lifetime. The journey continued one logbook entry at a time, each flight building toward a future where expertise would be valued regardless of its source. A future made more possible by a 13-year-old girl who once stood in a cockpit doorway during a crisis and spoke with the certainty of knowledge that transcended expectation. Thank you for watching this extraordinary story of courage, knowledge, and the power of looking beyond our assumptions. If you found Journey inspiring, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What unexpected sources of wisdom have you encountered in your own life? Your stories and perspectives enrich our community and remind us all that excellence can come from anywhere when we're willing to recognize it.